Thanks for being here, and thanks so much for taking some time out of your day. I hope it's going to be a great one for you. So, I want to start with a question. Who here remembers where they were and what they were doing on 9/11? Pretty much all of us, because it was such a shocking, outrageous, emotion-laden day. It's kind of seared into your memory, and we'll probably never forget it. It's also an example of disruption, of entirely the wrong kind, but no one saw this coming. Not the organization behind it, the method they would use, or the place they would attack. And that is very often the case with disruption. So for the next 19 minutes or so, I want to unpack this a little bit more and bring it into a business context. Now, for 45 years after the Second World War, you had two big ideologies facing off against each other. You had the Warsaw Pact and communism on one hand, and on the other hand, you had capitalism and NATO and the Cold War. It never broke out into another global conflagration because of the fact that we had this bizarre concept of mutually assured destruction. I nuke you, you nuke me, and we wipe out humanity. Fortunately, no one was nuts enough to press the button on that. But what it meant was for 45 years, there wasn't a lot of change in military doctrine, military strategy. It was all kind of based on conventional warfare. The weapons got bigger, sure. The missiles flew further, sure. But not much changed other than that. And then, quite suddenly, in 1989, the Berlin Wall came down. In 1991, the USSR collapsed. And suddenly into the vacuum emerged new actors, new threats, new types of ways of waging warfare, of which 9/11 is one example. And what this meant for the folks at the US military academies was that they needed to go back to the drawing board quite quickly and figure out a new way of teaching their leadership about the world that they would be fighting in going forward. And we've seen a lot of those new methods in the war on terror. And what they came up with was a framework called Vuca. So it's not entirely new. It's been around since the 90s, but it's starting to come more and more into the world of business. And as you heard earlier on, it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. On their own, each one of those presents some challenges. Together, they create a really wicked problem that we need to kind of deal with in our everyday lives. And together they are really, I think, the new normal. And what I'm going to show you in a few minutes is how that new normal happens in our world as well. So these are the various dimensions. Just think about volatility for a moment as one dimension. You have the frequency with which change happens. You have the amplitude of the change, the size of the change. And you also have the fact that often it doesn't change in the same sort of trajectory. It changes and things move around. So you see there, that's just one dimension, and you see some of the complexity that comes with that. When you add all four together, we need some new capabilities. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, what has this got to do with me? I make jam, I make motor cars, I'm a retailer, I'm a bank, and I'm talking about stuff that's going on in the military sphere. Well, the reason I'm doing that is because I think there's much we can learn from the military when we run our businesses. And just to give you a few examples, who remembers traveling before 9/11 and traveling today? It is a vastly different proposition. You waste a lot more time at the airport going through security. It's a much less pleasant experience, and it obviously has an impact on productivity every time you have to stand in a queue for these kind of checks. So something that happened in a very different sphere of the world impacts all of us today, just illustrating the interconnectedness of everything in the world. But the other important reason to look at this kind of stuff is that a lot of the things we take for granted today, you may have used a GPS system to come here. You're on the internet. All of this stuff has its roots in military research typically. Earlier on the other stage, Jens talked about the fact that the Industrial Revolution kicked off here. One of the big impulses for the start of the Industrial Revolution here in Britain was Britain's need to get better at making arms and ammunition and stuff for the various wars it was fighting in the 1700s and the early 1800s. So that impulse was in fact one of the things that drove the Industrial Revolution. But maybe more importantly for us, your leadership skills, your management skills, your organization gets really tested on the battlefield. And there's a lot that we can learn from there that we can bring into our businesses. So whether you studied at a business school and did an MBA, where quite often you will encounter a 2,500-year-old text by Sun Tzu called The Art of War, or whether you're looking at more contemporary articles such as the Harvard Business Review looking at lessons from the modern battlefield and how they map into modern business, there are these parallels that we can draw between the two worlds. And I would contend that it doesn't matter if you're a captain in the infantry trying to deploy your resources in the fog of the battlefield, or you're a captain of industry or commerce trying to deploy your resources in the fog of competitor activity, regulation, new consumer demands. The parallels are there, and in many cases they become increasingly obvious when you start digging into this type of stuff. And digging in is what you have to do if you want to deal with disruption. You have to have an organization that when it gets disrupted is capable of dealing with that. Better than that, you have to have an organization that is creating disruption itself, because that's how you get ahead of the curve. So as you can see here, there is a vehicle going down a long straight road, probably thinking everything's all hunky-dory, and suddenly disruption. It's like that in business. You've got a business strategy, you've got a plan, the quarter's looking good, you're heading towards your number, and suddenly there's a new competitor on the horizon, or a new customer demand, or you have a tsunami wiping out half of your supply chain, or you have an act of fraud in your business like we saw recently with a chain here in the UK. It can come from anywhere. But one thing is true today, increasingly that disruption is going to be digital in nature. It's so on the battlefield, and it is so in our lives. Whatever we do, digital disruptors are acting to find ways to fish in our profit pools and disintermediate us from our customer relationships. Now, I've been in the IT industry for a long time, 3.5 decades, and I can honestly say I don't think we've ever seen things moving so fast on so many fronts as we are seeing today. Astonishing progress in science and technology. And these things are feeding off each other. So, as we get cheaper and cheaper computing power, we can do better and better physics and biotech, and we can build better materials and deliver precision medicine. So these things are coming together, feeding off each other, and amplifying and accelerating the pace of change that we will have to deal with. And what's happening out there at the same time is this emerging group of organizations, startups, and we'll be talking to some later on this very same stage, are seizing the opportunity to take these technologies and be disruptive. This is a slide that shows you how fast the unicorns are growing. They're themselves growing exponentially if you look at the right-hand side of the slide. And they're all coming after your business in some way, shape, or form. And the interesting thing is that even if they don't all succeed, and many of them won't, they will fall away. But every time we encounter them as citizens, as customers, and as employees, they change the way we think about the world. They change what we expect from the organizations that we deal with. And you can see this on pretty much every front of human endeavor. These changes coming very, very rapidly and raising these expectations. So if you're an incumbent company, you have to kind of keep up with this. And that becomes quite difficult. And you have to start looking in different places for your competition. Years ago, it would be that if you were Procter & Gamble, for example, you probably looked at what Unilever were doing and at what Johnson & Johnson were doing. Today, you've got to look at companies like Dollar Shave Club, cropping up quickly and becoming $1 billion company almost overnight and taking 17% market share in a couple of years. If you're in automotive, where you were BMW looking at Merck, now you've got to look at what's happening with Tesla, Local Motors, and Waymo, who are filing lots and lots of patents in the field of autonomous vehicles. If you make chips, the stuff that goes into our phones and our computers, it used to be if you were Intel, you looked at AMD and Qualcomm. Now we've got Facebook and Google making their own chips to deal with the vast amounts of data that they sit on and apply artificial intelligence to that. And who's in banking here? anybody, you know probably more than most that maybe the biggest cohort of these pesky little startups is in the fintech industry, and they're coming after your customer relationships and the services that you provide. So the symmetry that we had in our own world has also disappeared, and I'm sure you feel sometimes it's just mad out there. What do you do next? Where do you go to next? And then you layer in, on top of those science and technology things, you layer in some of the social, political things that are happening out there. Brexit, climate change, generational change in the workforce, trade wars, and I would argue we've got maybe more Vuca in our world than the military have in theirs. And we need to figure out what to do about that. So it begs the question, what do you do about this? And the key thing is to shape yourself as a Vuca Prime organization. Now, there's an Institute for the Future. They've done a lot of work on this. You can go to their website. But what they talk about is you need 4 capabilities to really be a Vuca Prime organization that not just survives, but thrives in this world. Doesn't just react, but gets on the front of the wave and is able to surf it. You've got to have a strong vision or purpose, call it what you will, but you've got to have something that is well articulated, communicated to your company, that is the North Star. It doesn't matter how much turbulence is buffeting you, everyone knows what you're going for. And then on top of that, you have to understand what's happening around you. This is about building situational awareness and using the data that you have available to you to really get a deep understanding of where the world is going and what might happen next. You need clarity, which comes from having simplification of the experiences people have, simplification a lot of the time in IT, but also a single version of the truth that you can go to make your decisions. And then you have to be able to move really, really quickly in order to be agile. And that's not just having real-time computing in place, that's going beyond being able to respond very quickly and analyze very quickly to actually being able to simulate the future. So running these simulations that help you to rehearse what might come next. So when it does come, you've kind of already seen it and you know how to respond. And when you have those business capabilities in place, then you're in a strong position to drive your own digital disruption and certainly to fend off these other disruptors that are out there. Which begs another question, and thanks for coming today again, but what can SAP do to help you in this? There's a number of areas that we can help. The first is in dealing with all the data. We've put massive investments into making sure we've been able to build a platform to deal with data, then to analyze that data, to make sense of it, to get this understanding that we need in order to do the next big thing we need to do. Integration remains crucially important because our processes now run across networks, so we have to integrate in order to make sure that these processes are efficient, productive, and responsive. We have to drive engagement. You heard about the recent acquisition we've made of Qualtrics. That's all about really understanding whether people are enjoying the engagement that they're having with us and continually refining that so folks come back and they want to talk to us and they want to deal with us. Zero latency, I think, speaks for itself. When you talk about being agile, that means moving very, very fast when something happens. And last but not least, this is not a one-off proposition. You have to keep innovating. That's why we're doing this event today, is to kind of introduce you to some of the innovations that we're doing. You have to keep doing this over and over again to stay relevant and successful in the eyes of your customers. And when you bring that all together, you're kind of looking at an intelligent enterprise that's able to get the data, do get good stuff with the data, and provide better outcomes for customers, employees, and various other stakeholders. And how we do that at SAP is through the Intelligent Enterprise Framework that some of you may know about. But very quickly, at the fundamental foundation of the Intelligent Enterprise is what we call the digital platform, where you have the ability to drive and manage any sort of data. On top of that, we call out emerging technologies such as IoT, machine learning, and blockchain. And on top of that, we have our suite of applications increasingly integrated into end-to-end processes. All integrated together and all delivered in the context of whatever industry you're in and line of business you're responsible for. This gives you choice, folks, whether you simply want to optimize, do something that you already do better, faster, cheaper, whether you want to extend that, so move from bricks and mortar into e-commerce, for example, or whether you want to completely disrupt. We have a set of capabilities driven by data that allow you to take this framework and make it work for you. So as you walk around here today, you'll see examples of all of these various things on the various different stands, both at SAP and with our partners. So Peter Drucker, great writer, once talked about the fact, or wrote about the fact that if you want a better future, you better get out there and create it. Which begs the question, how do you do that? It could be as simple as putting a new user interface on the front end of an existing process and making it easier for your people to work. It could be, as in the case of Shell with their SkyPad application, looking at a process that's been done the same way pretty much since flying began and completely reshaping that to deliver better customer experiences and better productivity inside the organization. So I'm going to let the video run now and let Shell talk about what they've done with us on that digital platform.
Shell Aviation is one of the commercial businesses within the overall Royal Dutch Shell Group. And what we do is we provide fuel services and lubricant services to airline customers. Shell Aviation is fueling an aircraft every 14 seconds with Shell branded fuel. Refueling can happen in sort of plus 45 degree conditions in Dubai to minus 45 in Yellowknife. And people were trying to use pieces of paper, how much fuel was going on the aircraft, what was the aircraft registration, getting the pilots or the maintenance engineers to sign this.
We saw this opportunity to work with SAP and develop a mobile cloud-based application that could automate the ticketing process for the operators, digitally connect the flight operators and the vehicles into the ticketing process. So by doing that on the SAP cloud platform, we could achieve the agility and the flexibility and keeping the integration into a more controlled ERP environment.
From the very beginning of our e-aviation project, we had this sort of dream to get real-time data directly from the apron into our global SAP system. Before, when we were using a paper-based system, it could take 24 or 48 hours for it to get into our SAP system.
We now use the SkyPad application in a way which simplifies the operator's job by inputting the flight data into the flight schedule, which is then uploaded to the SkyPad. So when the operators are out refueling, they've got all the information pre-populated, and all they need to enter are the meter readings, the times, to obtain the necessary signatures. The main benefits of the SkyPad application would be improved data accuracy, reduced costs, greater operational efficiency, and for the customers, a quicker turnaround. So when you have an aircraft which is coming in on a 25-minute turnaround, every second counts. So if we can perform the refuel and go through the whole process 1 minute quicker, then that counts a lot for the customer.
It's really important that we've had, through the SAP cloud platform, the opportunity to very quickly and easily get that global scalability, and also to be able to work with the SAP team to be able to manage and customize for particular demands in certain countries. What we expect in terms of business value from the e-aviation initiative is a substantial time saving. So we reduced the length of time for a transaction from 48 minutes by 16 minutes. And that actually means we save an average of 13.3 hours per day per airport.
So that's a great example of bringing together assets that Shell already had, their core ERP system, with new mobile capabilities, IoT, managing the data, marrying up the process and creating great new value, as you heard in that video. Productivity, better customer experiences, kind of a number of big wins from this sort of innovative approach. So how do you get this done in your organization? Because it's not easy. We've built lots of tools, lots of accelerators to help you get there. I'd encourage you to engage through your account executives, and let's have some conversations around how we bring these great services and tools to bear to help you start thinking about getting from where you are today to where you'd like to be tomorrow and beyond. Because I truly believe if we bring together your vision with our intelligent enterprise framework, the capacity of our various partners that are here today and others that may not be, we can really help you become a Vuca Prime organization, able to soak up anything the world throws at you and be enormously successful going forward into a world of great possibility. Thank you.